All right, I've got the director from Be Water, Bao Nguyen, joining me from the program. He is cinematography credits, director credits. This guy can do it all. He's won awards for what he's done, but we're really excited for his latest project, and I really appreciate his time for joining me here on the Protect Your Neck podcast. Of course, this is Dan Tom, analyst of USA Today Sports and MMA Junkie. Welcome to the program, Bao.
Thank you so much for having me.
Really appreciate you coming on and really appreciate what you're doing here. Obviously, my role is a martial arts analyst, so perhaps that's how our paths may have crossed here. And I usually cover fight sports, competed, whatnot myself. So perhaps there's obvious appreciations that won't surprise you if I tell you that I'm a Bruce Lee fan. But and I'm not trying to abuse my interview status here, but to provide context of my appreciation for your film here. But also as an Asian American and half Chinese myself, also have dabbled in acting and whatnot, and have seen a lot of the things that your documentary covers. So with that context laid for me, this was particularly awesome, for lack of better words. It was, and I'm obviously going to throw to you here, it was an angle that I don't know if people are going to be expecting, but I'm really appreciative that you tackled, Bao.
I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, as you say, a lot of people know about Bruce Lee. They have a lot of different kind of entry points into Bruce Lee, and we all kind of project our stories and our different interests because he was so kind of prolific, and he was a Renaissance man, right? He was an actor, he was a martial artist, he was a teacher. But I wanted to kind of see him through a lens that felt a bit more personal to me. As an Asian American, my parents were Vietnamese war refugees. They left Vietnam on a boat. They were in Hong Kong for 6 months in a refugee camp, and then came over to America. So when I was looking at Bruce's story, him leaving Hong Kong, coming to America on a boat, not having much, not having many connections, that part of the story really resonated with me. And trying to connect something that I felt personal was always a goal of mine for all my films, because I feel like those type of ways of storytelling feel more honest and authentic, and I hope that came through in the film when you watched it.
As an, I use the term loosely, but as an artist and content creator of sorts, I completely agree with you as far as that note on passion. And when you tap into something like that, does the story at that point start to write itself? Because, and I definitely want your opinion on this, you kind of touched on it there, where I don't think, if I may speak for you loosely, I don't think guys like me or you would maybe relate to, Bruce Lee as in the sense of, okay, even if, we're in the martial arts, we're not as fast as this guy, we're not as, we don't have the charisma, or anything like that. And forgive me for speaking for you, but then you watch your film and this angle of Bruce Lee as a human being, and I think a lot of people, for their own reasons, and thank you for sharing that, by the way, that as far as your story, and yeah, I think a lot of people are going to find, I dare say, that they relate to a figure that they wouldn't imagine relating to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. I think that was really the main goal of the film in many ways, because Bruce Lee is such a cultural global icon, and like many people even see him as like mythical and like almost as a deity, right? And I think I want to unpack that myth of Bruce Lee, a myth, and look at Bruce the person. And I found that a lot of times when we're able to connect and empathize and relate to our heroes, that's when we can really truly aspire to be like them. And it was important for me to find out about Bruce's insecurities, his fears, his vulnerabilities, because Bruce Lee is such this model of masculinity and confidence, but we don't know about his first girlfriend, Amy Sambo, in America very much. That was one of the main people that I learned the most from. She was Japanese American. She was in the internment camps, and she really taught Bruce what it meant to be Asian American, because he had just arrived over from Hong Kong, landing in America, not knowing kind of which part of himself he was going to show to the world, to America. And so she kind of taught him, like, oh, you can be both. You can be Asian and American. And just that identity of being Asian American is something I think deeply rooted in Bruce's kind of confidence and pride in himself. But at the same time, he didn't want to think of himself as just his race or his nationality, right? And I think that's also a part of the story that I wanted to explore, that I think is very relevant, obviously, to what's going on today.
Absolutely, and that's a great, jumping off point, which is, for one, I really appreciated the first girlfriend perspective. That was something I was ignorant on. Somebody who's, went down the Bruce Lee rabbit hole a few times, let's just say. And I'm also part Japanese, so you get these kind of stirred up things, or seeing that I'm also part Irish, and seeing the Irish were the ones policing the Chinese during the railroads. Which, thank you for including that, as well as the Chinese exclusionary act, because again, parlaying to what you kind of just may have segued to is, and you couldn't have planned for this, not that you would, and not that any of us would wish for unrest anywhere. But man, does history almost kind of repeat itself, And we're very familiar with the unrest in the 1960s, especially with the unrest that's going on now. We tend to reflect, but again, without spoiling too much, I want people to watch this for themselves. But you talk about the unrest in Hong Kong at the time, and the parallels are very, very powerful. And I think, at least I hope, it will resonate with people, because, and I'm not the political type, and I'm not trying to get political here, but we do live in a world that's very left or right, white or black, and I feel like Bruce and the Chinese, Asians, however you want to cut up that demographic and the importance of it, offers kind of an important third-party perspective, but you still as well highlight both sides of the left to right, or white or black, as they're relevant to society. And I really hope people take away the greater, which was, to me, a very positive message, as far as what your film, whether you purposely or how much of it was purposeful and obviously inadvertently, really parallels history.
Yeah, again, it's hard. You can never predict what's going to go on when you release the film. Obviously, I couldn't have predicted what's going on with the racial injustice in Minnesota, with George Floyd, and with what's happening with COVID too, where there's a lot of anti-Asian incidents directed at a whole group of people who have nothing to do with what's happening with the pandemic, right? And I think Bruce understood what it meant to just treat someone and meet someone based on who they were instead of what they look like or where they came from. And I think that was informed by the people he met early on, not just Amy Sanvo, but Jesse Glover, his first student, and being able to meet all these different types of people. Like in Seattle, at the time it was pretty diverse community, even though it was segregated. But he was talking to some, he was working out with someone like Jesse Glover, who was a victim of police brutality, and that's one of the reasons that Jesse decided to learn martial arts. And then that informed, I think, the rest of Bruce's approach and philosophy towards America, towards his time in America, and just his philosophy even towards martial arts. Like, the idea of like bridging the gap, that martial arts idea is a different, I took it in a way of not purely through the martial arts technique of bridging the gap, but through the idea that he wanted to kind of bridge the gap between the people around him and all the differences that people were seeing. And he was trying to find the commonalities. That's why he was able to bring his martial art, his sport, Kung Fu, to a new group of young people in Seattle. And that's how he connected. And that's how he was trying to become American, by showing him the best of his culture, of himself, instead of thinking of all the differences that sometimes we dwell upon too much.
Absolutely. And again, not to, make this about, you or me or anyone in particular, but yes, that the Asian American struggle, I think you guys really, really nailed it on the head as far as a lot, whether you're, quote unquote, a half breed like myself, as is quoted, from another fellow half breed. I'm sorry if I'm not speaking in politically correct terms. Hopefully people understand the context. Or
You
whether
can you can speak for yourself. Own it, right?
right, exactly. Or you're, just an immigrant, like Bruce Lee, was having to have, in a sense, having to come over shortly after being 18. That you have to make a choice, and the way you guys put that in context, especially with how the Chinese have typically fell within, the race dogma, for lack of a better word, of that unwritten book, if you will. Although with the Chinese Exclusionary Act, some things were in fact written. I think you guys did a really great job in providing context for that people, again, might not be aware of, but I think they may be particularly perceptive to, again, with the unfortunate events of George Floyd and the unrest, going on in this / our country right now.
Yeah, totally. I really appreciate that. I think I wanted to view kind of what lens was different about Bruce Lee that we hadn't talked about, because again, people, when they think of Bruce Lee, they see him as someone that's already successful, right? The name Bruce Lee doesn't, like, you don't think of struggle or vulnerability or someone who was rejected. You think of someone who's like the biggest badass in the world. And that's, eventually he became that, but only really after his death. He had to go through a lot of, like, rejection again from Hollywood with the cancellation of the Green Hornet, or, being turned down for the role of Kung Fu. Things like that are what really make a person, I feel like, all of these different failures. So I wanted to focus on those failures in terms of learning how Bruce became Bruce Lee. And, in no ways is this supposed to be a definitive documentary about Bruce Lee. There's so many different stories and different angles that you can approach any subject. And it's also not like, I know there's a lot of fans out there who are hoping to see footage that they've never seen before. And that's obviously tough when you're dealing with someone who's such a legend and who has such a large fan base, who has been, going to yard sales and swap meets every weekend trying to find lost tapes of Bruce Lee. And so I was trying to maybe find out the more personal side and learn from the people that knew him best and get that different side of Bruce Lee. So that's kind of the rare conversations, again, talking to like Amy Sambo, or even his younger brother, Robert Lee, who hasn't spoken on camera about him in a while. And obviously the stories of Shannon and Linda Lee Cadwell. And then Kareem, too. Kareem hasn't spoken about Bruce in a documentary in a long time. So that was obviously a unique conversation, given what's happening right now, because Kareem also, he was also teaching Bruce. He was Bruce's student, but he was teaching Bruce about the civil rights movement and the Black liberation movement and what was going on to the African American community in the 1960s.
Right, absolutely. I'm glad you put Kareem in there as well. And you're right, he hasn't spoken on Bruce in a while, because I actually recently wrote an article about partially about Kareem, but basketball players with martial arts experience. Of course, Kareem was going to come up on there. But Bao, I gotta also ask you, because I don't want to dive too far in. I do want people to watch this for themselves. But I love how you guys portrayed the failures, like you said, of Bruce. But more specifically, again, when you were trying to, whether, as you pointed, him inserting dialogue or him inserting his own style of the fight scenes, as you see the evolution through his short career, people don't realize, and I know you can speak to this as a director, a filmmaker, trying to get things through, whether it's producers or brass, or me trying to get things through my editors or chiefs. New ideas are tough to present and get done in Hollywood, you can attest much more than me. Now, further peeling back the onion, whether we want to admit it or not, where those ideas come from also help the percentage of that idea coming through. So if you're a confident person, or perhaps look a certain way and carry yourself a certain way, perhaps that you have a better chance. So the fact of, without getting, stating the obvious of systemic racism and looking different as an Asian, but yes, as an Asian or Chinese man, for him to eventually kind of get his way and as far as productions say, I mean, I can't understate it. That's huge. That's huge. No.
Yeah, you think about it. It's the 1960s. It's the Asian was portrayed as the sidekick, as a heavily accented servant. They were never seen as a hero, right? As on the big screen and also in many ways in society. So you've got someone with the charisma, the confidence of Bruce Lee, demanding that they add more lines, or that he can put some of his philosophy into his films. That's something that Hollywood producers, any type of executives, had never witnessed before, because they were used to, for the most part, Asian Americans just like staying quiet in the corner and just being just complying with directions. But Bruce was different. He took charge and was confident, and I think people weren't necessarily ready for that, and sometimes they saw it as arrogance. And I think one of the things that I learned from talking to his loved ones, his friends, his family, is that he was very confident, and people might see it as arrogant, but he backed up everything he said. I think that's important.
Absolutely, and Bao, thank you. Appreciate your time here. We'll be getting you out of here after just two more quick questions. But just on that note, on one of those two questions, which is, yes, that's what kind of made it even the story and his accomplishments more powerful. That he was an Asian man accomplishing this in Hollywood. But I got to ask you, just kind of speculative moving forward, again, because I want people to unpack this for themselves on what you present. But now, you move forward to today, and unfortunately, I'm not trying to end on a sour note or anything, but because you provide a positive message with your product. But in today's Hollywood, we are still seeing, let's be honest, we're still seeing a lot of whitewashing, whether it's originally written or historically written roles for Asians. We've got guys like, I quote the Joe Rogan podcast, where guys like Eddie Huang, who I'm not sure if you're familiar with, chef, book writer, fresh off the boat, was saying, and I believe as well as David Cho, who's a very popular artist, they're talking about, pardon my French, but like Hollywood won't let Jackie Chan, won't let him, hook up with girls, so to speak. They probably put it in a much more, colorful term. But yes, and you see that, where Romeo Must Die, Eddie Wong, which I relate to him. I'm the same age as him. It's like, man, if they would have let Jet Li kiss Aaliyah, my dating life would have been so much better as an Asian American growing up. And there's a lot of truth to that. I mean, even Romeo and Juliet parallel, they won't even let them hold hands. And I'm not trying to be negative here, but do you hope to see change as well in that department when you put out a product like this?
Yeah, of course. I think going back to today, in the time of COVID, where a lot of people are staying at home, right, and they don't get these face-to-face interactions with other people, with society, with their neighbors as much. So they're stuck at home watching television, reading books, watching films, and that's their access and interaction with society. What they see on screen, those depictions of people, of Asian Americans, of African Americans, that's society to them, right? It's reflected back. And so that's why it's so important that these depictions are representative and are authentic and multifaceted, that they don't show just one type of story of an Asian. They show that an Asian can be a hero, an Asian could be a romantic lead. And that's why I think this film is really important, because it shows kind of the hero in Bruce Lee. And I mean, one of the tragic things about his early death is he would have been a great advocate for representation. He didn't want to just be a martial arts action star. He wanted to play the leading man. He wanted to play like in dramas. So then people would have opportunity to see someone with the charisma as Bruce Lee play all these roles, and their ideas of what an Asian American man is would be totally different, I think, right? Because we would have, for the past 40 years, we would have that example, and we just haven't had it as strongly as we should.
No, and well said, and I really hope that things like what you're putting out there, thank you for that again on many layers. Hopefully change that. I want to be respectful of your time, Bao, but I also just got to get at least one MMA question in there. Even though it didn't focus on the martial arts, I appreciate the angle you took. I still think it represented mixed martial arts very well. I got to ask, are you a mixed martial arts fan, and do you realize, and are you familiar with how much of an impact that Bruce Lee still has on that scene?
Yeah, I'm not the biggest fan because when I was young, my parents kind of traumatized me because I would take kung fu when I was because they wanted to just instill some discipline in me. My father was in the military, and I just got my ass whooped. So I was like, okay, I'm staying away from martial arts for a long time, and I've always been a fan of it. I think there's a discipline and a philosophy that's really important. And I actually started taking Jeet Kune Do when I was doing research for the film, just to kind of really get in the shoes of Bruce. So I definitely respect it, and I definitely understand Bruce's influence on the idea of mixed martial arts, just because he's always thinking of ways to blend different styles and not be rigid in terms of like traditions of fighting and fighting systems. And I think for sure when Dana White says Bruce Lee is like the father of mixed martial arts, that's a pretty true statement.
Well, jiu-jitsu wasn't being said to the early 90s, but if people watch your documentary, they're going to be pleasantly surprised on how many shouts it gets from Bruce Lee. Bao, thank you for your time. If there's anything else you want to say, the floor is yours. I just want to say thank you, appreciate your time, and it really was a great, great film.
Thank you so much, Dan. I really appreciate it, and thanks for reaching out, and I really enjoyed our conversation.